Hi, I'm Scott McArthur and welcome to Artefact. Well, here we are once again, and hopefully tonight we have a slightly different experience to last night. I can't tell you how earth-shattering it was when my partner Samantha walked into the studio with this sign, and it was like, oh my word, and I had been speaking for the best part of 15 minutes. So hopefully tonight we have a slightly better connection and we can have some fun. Before I do start though, I would just like to say thank you ever so much to the amount of people who, I don't know if they felt fear for me or empathy for me, but I'm really touched by it. And I had messages there was over 200 people tuned in last night on the 5 different channels. And I had messages from all sorts of people, from Ross to Zamir to Andy to Samantha, obviously, to Amy. So thank you ever so much, folks. I so appreciate it. And hopefully this evening we can have a much more interactive, an actual interactive experience. So let's get into this. So what we're going to do tonight is just have an introduction to storytelling, and I'm obviously going to tell you some stories, and I'd like to tell you how this all started for me, and hopefully to get you to start to think about your own story. So this started with an experience I had when I was quite a young guy, and it concerned something. And that something was my grandfather's foot. Now, what I'd like you to do is just think about what that makes you think about in your head, my grandfather's foot. And what it's actually about is not what it sounds like it's about. It's not about my grandfather's foot. It's about something else. And what happened was, and if you've seen one of my talks, you may have heard me tell this story before, but what happened was I called him my Papa, and Papa had an angina attack, and it was quite bad. And it meant that he couldn't really do a lot of the things that he loved doing. And he was a walker. He would visit the Scottish Highlands. He would do the Coolins. He was an amazing walker and an amazing man. And when he had the angina attack, he unfortunately couldn't do it anymore. Now, I was living in Edinburgh at the time in a little bedsit in Stanhope Place, which is quite near to the Murrayfield Stadium, to anyone who knows Edinburgh, where Scotland play rugby. And he started to write me letters. And he wrote me a letter every week, sometimes 2 or 3 letters every week for a good part of 30 years. And that had a lasting impression on me. And what happened was that he wrote to me so many times that I ended up with a foot of letters. And this is an old printing box I bought in a thrift shop in Edinburgh. And in this box, and I hope I don't tip them up because they're in order at the moment, is my grandfather's foot deep of letters. Now, I'm going to touch on hopefully how that resonated with you. I hope it did. Just think about it. If it didn't, we'll come back to it. But when I first told that story on a stage, I remember I was very nervous. I'd never told the story. It's a very personal story. And I told this audience, and I noticed there was people in the audience crying. And right now I can feel my emotions coming up. It's one of these very strong, powerful stories that, for me, I mean, I'm not saying it is for you, but for me, it's a very strong and powerful story. And there's something about it that I think really captures the imagination. And I'm going to come back to that, not this week, next week, and talk about how to hook an audience with your first statement. And I'd like you to think about it. And if you enjoyed tonight, to start thinking about, what book, perhaps first chapter or first sentence has really captured me. And it doesn't need to be a grown-up book. It can be a child's book. But we will come back to that. So I'm actually getting messages as well tonight, which is even more encouraging. So you can hear me and you can send me messages. So if you have any questions at all, folks, just let me know. Andy, I'm delighted you can hear me. And Sam, thank you very much. But I'm going to go into tonight, I'm going to go into some of the history of this. I'm going to go into some of the reasons why story is so strong and so important for human beings. And it's all about the way we developed. And I'm not going to go into don't worry, I'm not going to bore you with loads of evolutionary theory and stuff like that. I could if you want me to, but I'm not going to. Just frame it like this. I mean, human beings have been around, it varies depending on when you think the fossil record indicated that we became human, but it's a good probably 500 generations. It's only 500 generations. But before we became this, the wise ape that we are, before that we were different types of hominid, and we spent an incredible 50,000 generations in that state. And I think that is quite mind-blowing, and it's hard to get your head around it, but there was something about story that grasped us at that point, because even before we could speak, which is the research varies, but it's about 30,000 years ago, but before we could speak, we were communicating, we were telling story using branches, and we were using grunts, etc. There's evidence that our throats were developing at that point. But then about 30,000 years ago, we started to paint and tell stories on the walls of caves. And if you've never come across cave painting, or I'm sure everybody's seen some cave painting, but there's a place in France called Chauvet, and there's a brilliant film about the Chauvet caves that if you're interested, it's called The Caves of Forgotten Dreams. And it is glorious in terms of how it describes the life that they had in those days, the stories that they had in those days. But right away, there's something that I'd like you to think about, and this is like a principle that people say to me, how come you're so good at telling stories? Well, I think that the actual truth is that everybody is good at telling stories. They just don't know it. So the first thing I would say to everybody is, you can tell stories just as well as any other person. And if you can't do it at the moment, the purpose of this live event over the next few weeks is to help you tell more of your own stories. So that's my overriding purpose for this, because I think that one of the things we need more than anything going into the new norm and into the post-COVID time is to be better at telling stories, because you know what? Stories can change the world, and they don't even need to be true, the stories. I mean, the biblical myths, the religious myths across the 3,000 or so religious faiths, they may not be true, but they do help people's lives. So even if something's a myth, it can still be powerful and can still be very, very helpful. So the first thing I want you to think about is, anyone can tell a story. But the second thing that I'd like you to think about, and maybe let me know what you think, is this, that about 2 years ago, I decided, as some of you know, to become a professional speaker. I'd been speaking on and off when I had been working in consulting, etc. And I'd done a little bit of lecturing, etc. But I'd never taken it particularly seriously. And the truth is, I sat down with Samantha, my other half, and we spoke about, what am I good at? And it was quite a hard conversation, but I was good at speaking. So I thought, okay, let's take this seriously. And initially, I started by, telling other people's stories, telling stories from books, or telling stories from, newspapers or storybooks, telling other people's stories. But I very quickly realised, having, gone along to meet other speakers, that they were doing the same thing. And I didn't want to be the same as everybody else. And I had an experience on a stage when I told a story about my professor, and I may well tell it one day on this stream. And I remember the feeling in the room. It was weird. The room resonated, and I was like, oh, that worked. And of course, none of them had heard the story before. It was my story. I didn't make it up. It was a true story. It happened in my life. And I realised at that point on a stage in London that maybe what I need to get better at is telling my own story. So I spent probably the best part of the last 18 months doing what I call the archaeological dig of my own life, looking at stories from my own life and trying to understand, why they had an impact on me and why they had an impact on my family and my relationships, my parents, my grandparents, everybody else, my friends. And I've now got, on my phone here, I've got over 300 little stories written down. And these are great because I can pick and mix them. And even yesterday, before I had this epic fail with the sound, I was looking at, I was thinking about stories, and I'm thinking, I wonder if there's anything else. And I was just thinking about story itself. And it came to me that back, it's a long time ago, but my first publication after I left the sort of scientific stuff I did was actually about story. And it was the most inconsequential thing you've ever seen, but it was in the Times. It was a little 2-sentence sort of blurb on why I'd read an article in the Times, somebody saying, oh, there's too much gossip and too much small talk in the way we run our businesses. And I went, well, wait a wee minute. No, I think maybe it's more important than that, because that gossip, those stories are actually quite important because they spread things, not always good things, but they spread things around organisations and around communities. And I got loads of response to it. I mean, I think I got about 300 emails. I was working in the corporate world, so this really important memo saying, well done, you've been in the Times, and nothing to do with them. But anyway, I got that. And I realised at that point that maybe there was something we could do with story. So I started to get into it, started to understand it. And then in 2008 or 2009, I was working in a kind of sales environment, and I was trying to work out, is there any way we can use story to actually be better in the sales environment? So I started to investigate it, and I started to think about, could I, use story in that environment? And sorry, I don't know why that happened. There you go. Sorry, this is going to happen, guys. Sorry. So back in 2009, I tried to come up with this idea, and what happened was amazing, because I came across a guy called Rob Walker. And Rob Walker was I don't know if you call him an ethnologist, but he was somebody who was studying human behaviour and what Richard Dawkins came up with the word memes. You probably heard memes in relation to your kids talking about little things on the internet, but Dawkins came up with this idea that culture is similar to a gene, so it's passed on down generations, and it's usually through stories. So this guy Walker had the idea of testing that. And I read this and I thought, my goodness, let me tell you about it, because it's another really good story. What Rob did was he started a project, and the project was called the Significant Objects Project. And I think the website is still live, actually, significantobjects.com. And he went on to eBay and he bought 200 pieces of junk. He spent, on average, $1.24 on each one of these pieces of junk. Trying to, just to see, what he could do with them. So he got these 200 objects, and there was things like the famous one was a little sort of horse's head, but he had also sort of like little, old fountain pens and an old calculator and, little paintings and all sorts of stuff, all sorts of rubbish that you would get in the average sort of car boot sale here in the UK. And then what he did, though, he set his website up and he said, right, a call to action. And he said, I'd like to attract 200 authors to write a story about the artifacts that I've purchased. So he did that, and he got 200 authors, some of them quite famous, actually. If you go onto the website, you'll see there's some quite well-known names there. And they all wrote little paragraphs, 200 or 300 words about each one of these artifacts. And then he set up a shop on eBay. You can guess where this is going. And he listed the 200 objects. The horse's head cost him $1.50. He sold it on eBay with that story connected to it for $68. $68. I mean, I can't even do the maths. Any mathematicians online can maybe tell me what that is, but it's a good return. And so that started me thinking. I thought, okay, and you wait to the end of the project, and then he published it at the end. And unbelievably, that $200 investment plus the stories developed into $8,000. So it was still tat, it was still rubbish, still bits of stuff you find in car boot sales, but the story made a huge difference. And at that point I thought, yeah, I've got to get into this. And I started to look into it in depth. I was working with a guy called Greg Stewart. Greg says hi yesterday, he was hoping to be here, but he couldn't make it. He's in Australia, it's 4 a.m. at the moment in Perth, in Oz. And we were looking at, where's the best examples of this? Can we find, how to really structure this? And at that time, there wasn't really a lot of stuff about story. There was the famous Joseph Campbell work, which I will come on to, The Hero's Journey, you might have heard of. I'll come on to that in a future one. But it was sparse, to say the least. There wasn't an awful lot of stuff that you could use that could be helpful in developing a story. But that has changed. And over the last few years, I think more and more, mainly journalists, that won't surprise you, but mainly journalists have got really interested in story. And I obviously have got interested as well. And what interests me is that it went from like 30,000 years ago, these beautiful cave paintings telling the stories of daily lives. So now that's developed through the years, and it's 2020, it's bloody PowerPoint slides. So how do we go from these beautiful things to these horrible, not always, but these PowerPoint slides? There's something gone wrong there, but nevertheless, there's something happening that I think is worth thinking about. So if there's any questions, please pop them in the chat. It should come up on my stream. I've seen a couple, so it is working. And I'll do my very best to answer any questions that you have. But forgive me if it's a little bit slow tonight, because I'm feeling a little bit slow myself tonight after last night. But so far I've looked at, why story? So things are, we like stories. I've looked at a little bit of the evolution. Oh, and incidentally, I forgot to say, guys, there's a book called The Moth Snowstorm. And in that book, the chap's name escapes me, but I'll put it in the description when I put this on YouTube and on LinkedIn as a rewatch. But this book talks about that evolutionary psychology in a beautiful way, and he talks about the 50,000 generations and the 500 generations. It's something that I think is quite beautiful, but it does describe how important it is for us to remember what we used to be like and how important that has on how we are today. So have a look at that. So if there are any questions, I don't see anything just now, so I'll just keep going. Well, there's a few things on here. Most of them are saying I can hear you, which is really good. That definitely makes me feel good. So let me just build on that then. Please ping me any questions if you got them. I thought deeply about it, as I said earlier, and I thought, right, okay, what's going on here? Because I was getting frustrated, if I'm honest. Then you can talk to any of my friends; they'll tell you how frustrated I was getting, because it was a case of, why are people not, listening to facts? Why are people not, reacting to facts the way I would have hoped they would? And what I've come up with is this. I think how it works is that facts tell and stories sell. Facts tell and stories sell. Because, I used to do a lot of sales in the technology space, and, you'd be working in these big projects, and most of it was nonsense, but you're selling great big operating systems, which are big computer things to companies that don't know what they want, and you would tell them how efficient they were and how much money they would save and all the rest of it. But actually, if you brought it to life with a story, they were much more likely to buy it. So that's the first thing I'd like you to remember in terms of this part. Facts are important and they tell stuff, but it's the stories that sell. And I think that bleeds across into things like politics. It bleeds across into things like the media, and a lot of the things that are happening at the moment with COVID and with President Trump and with Boris Johnson, whether you like them or not, it's not the point. It's the stories they're telling that are the interesting things. It's the stories that they're telling that really are the interesting things. So just have a think about what that could mean for you, because personally I think it's quite fascinating. Now there's something else I'd like to do, and I'm just going to check this feed again just to make sure I'm not missing any questions. Hold on, let me just do this. Boris Johnson, let's just see. Oh no, thank you very much for the well dones and the I can hear you. The other thing that I have found handy, and it kind of happened in the house here. I live in the Cotswolds with Samantha and my two young children, William and Bertie. And I think it was Sam got it. She'll tell me if I got this wrong. But I think there's a little box downstairs in the boys' room. I should have brought it. Sorry, I forgot. And it's got 6 cubes in it. And each cube has got a little emblem on it. And what you do is you shake 3 or 4 of these and you roll them on the bed, and then you make up a story based on what the emblems are. It's quite challenging. But nevertheless, I think Sam and I are quite good at it. And actually, the boys are quite good at it now. They tell their own stories using these things. But I think one of the things that can help you become a better storyteller is artifacts. That's why I called this this live thing, the Artefact Live, the sort of the art and the science of storytelling. And to bring that to life, this week I'm going to do it slightly differently, but in the following episodes of this, I'm going to ask you to help me select a story to tell you. And behind me here, I've got it's almost like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but it's a hierarchy of stories. And what I've got on here, these aren't random objects. These are all important objects in terms of, there's some of them are personal to me. There's some of them are about stuff I talk about when I'm doing keynotes, etc. on my YouTube channel. And I'm going to ask you to pick one. Now, I'll pick one myself this week because we're just getting used to this. But in the future weeks, what I'd like you to do is help me here, because this is how you transfer knowledge. This is how I can help you see how you could use story. And as we build on this over the next few weeks, hopefully you'll be able to take part, because I don't want to be doing all the talking. I want other people to be talking on this as well. So I can share the screen. You can join me if you wanted to. You can practice your stories in a safe space. Now, it's not only for people who are speakers, it's just not, because stories can not only help you, they can help you with your relationships. They can help you at work. So if you're looking for a job, anyone here who's from the HR profession, you get so many CVs that are all the same. You're as well throwing them up in the sky, grabbing one and choosing the person that you grab. Maybe that happens. But who gets the jobs these days tends to be the people who tell the best stories. So even kids, when they say, I can't tell stories, they've got stories. And I think this artifact idea might help. So let me choose one of these artifacts. And I'll tell you a quick story about it. Very, very, straightforward story, but nevertheless, something I think that is quite powerful. And I'm going to use my egg timer friend here. Now, this is an old-fashioned egg timer. It's actually a 45-minute egg timer. And again, I quite often talk about multimedia and about why the future is analog. And you should see people's faces when I bring this onto the stage. So even the artifact itself can be quite, and I'm sure you've got thoughts just looking at that, what's he doing, but you might be thinking about, cooking your breakfast or something. I'm wishing you were cooking your breakfast now rather than listening to me. But this is really important, because I had this sort of moment of realization some time ago when I was working in the corporate world, and I was always sort of very keen on companies using evidence and companies trying their best to find the truth by looking for the facts. But remember earlier though, I said facts tell, stories sell. And I realised that, and I don't know if I'm right, and I'm sure you'll call me out, some of you, but I think we've gone too far with that. And I was at a conference. It was a video conference, believe it or not. It was a long time ago, 5 years ago. And Warren Buffett came in as a guest. And Warren, he wasn't a great speaker, to be honest. It doesn't matter when you make much money as he has. If you've never heard of him, he's one of the top entrepreneurs in the world, one of the richest men in the world, one of the richest people, in the world. And someone asked him in the audience, Warren, what's the biggest problem in business? And honestly, this guy, he must have been, I think he's in his late 80s now, so he must have been in his early 80s when I saw him in this conference. And without a hesitation, he said, I'll tell you what it is. He said, it's people checking people checking people. And I went out of that conference. The rest of the conference just fizzed away. It didn't have much of an impact on me. But that statement, and he's not written about this in any books, because I've looked at it and I can't see anywhere where he might have said it. So people checking people checking people checking people. And weirdly, it really is weird, my next event, and I was doing a keynote, and it was for a series of auditors in a company up in Birmingham. And it was, because of course what do auditors do for a living? They're people who check people, check people, check people. And it made me think, and I thought, are we getting this all wrong? And what I meant there was, well, are we measuring too much? Have we gone too far? And I'd already got kind of suspicious of things like human capital, and I'm not going to get into that because it's quite boring, but too much measurement. Everybody's measuring everything, performance management, bell curves, all that stuff you've probably experienced. And I thought, wait a minute, what if we just boil it down to something really, really simple and say to organisations and individuals, no matter what you're doing, whether it's at work, on this live event, anything else, as long as you have your time and you understand your time is well spent, or you feel that your time is well spent, surely that's good enough. Now, I know that sounds quite naive, but I think it's quite cool, because if you do that in a meeting and you say to yourself, was that time well spent in that discussion, or was that time well spent going to see that movie, or was that time well, you get the drift, yeah? It's really powerful. And when I tell that with this in my hand on the keynote stage, people go, oh, I hadn't thought of that. And you can see their faces lighting up. Now, there's a guy called Tristram Harris who came up with that. He didn't come up with the phrase, but he's popularised the phrase, but in the technology world. And I think Tristram's onto something. I really do think he's onto something. So that's I'd love to hear what you think about that. Time well spent. And whether you think it's a good idea or a bad idea. But the key thing is the fact that the artifact itself helps me with the story, and as do all of these other things, and I will promise to come back to them. So I'm going to stop in 5 minutes, but before I do that, there's a couple of things I want to show you. One's a little graphic, it's a little movie, and unless you've been living under a rock for the last 10 years, or perhaps if you don't like violent TV shows, there's no violence in this clip incidentally, you might not know who this guy is, but just watch this. I think this fella sums up just how powerful stories are.
What unites people? Armies? Gold? Flags? Stories. There's nothing in the world more powerful than a good story. Nothing can stop it.
Fabulous. The delivery of that, I think, is amazing, and obviously the story itself is amazing. But I think that is absolutely right. And there's another one I want to leave you with, and it is this. It says that we are addicted to story. Even when the body goes to sleep, the mind stays up all night telling itself stories. We dream stories. We dream stories. Now that comes from a book that I've got here. And it's a lovely book. And it won't surprise you that there's a lot of biology in this book, because a lot of storytelling comes from this. And it's called The Storytelling Animal, How Stories Make Us Human by Jonathan Gottschall. It's a terrific book, and over the next few sessions, I'm going to use some of the content from Jonathan's work, because I think it's interesting the way he frames it, and I love the way he tells his own stories. So I will come back to that. I hope you found that interesting. I'm just going to check the chat if there's any other comments or any other stuff you want me to think about. I'll just check my chat. No, thank you. That's all right. Thank you very much for tuning in to this first half hour session on Anecdote. If you're interested in the stuff I talk about and the work I do, and there's nothing for sale, I'm not selling in here, guys. This is about trying to help folk with stories. I really believe this is something that can change the world. There's my YouTube channel. I'd be delighted if you pop across there and subscribe. And if you're watching this offline, any suggestions you might have for what I could cover next week would be great. I am going to focus on, as I said earlier, how you hook somebody with your first line. So remember what I said about my grandfather's foot, and try and remember, if you come back next week, how that made you feel, because I would like to know how it made you feel. Even if it made you feel confused, if it made you feel sad, happy, or whatever, that's fine. But I hope you found that interesting. Thank you ever so much for tuning in. I'm so happy that the sound worked this week, and I'll see you next week. I was Scott McArthur. This was Artefact Live, our first episode, part 2. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you soon. Good night.